Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart. I'm here with our host, Peter Scalzo, 20-year cancer survivor, and we do have a special guest in our midst today. And so, Eric Kingori, Pastor Eric, live here from Nairobi, Kenya. And so, welcome, Pastor. You're joining us today to be part of our conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah,
the great part is that Pastor Eric was just visiting, had no idea he would be on this podcast until we said, why don't you come up? He doesn't even know what we'll be talking about.
Neither do you. So
I don't either. We have that in common, Pastor Eric and I.
No idea.
All right. Well, I'm going to catch us up just a bit because we finished just talking a little bit about this Psalm of Lament. And then we started into a little bit of a new area. And I just happen to know that from conversations with Pastor Eric that he's read a little bit of John Eldredge's Wild at Heart, or John Eldredge's work. I don't know if it's Wild at Heart, but you've read some of his different works. And we started talking about, you and I have been involved with this, the current work of Sacred Romance. And in that space, we were kind of looking through some of the stages and some of the things about our journey and relationship with God. And we talked a bit about this deep inner knowing last week about our deep desire, this hole, this longing that's inside of us for a romance, as something that's bigger, that continues to draw us forward in our lives. And we were relating in a cancer journey. There's this week I wanted to talk about John Eldredge calls this the message of the arrows. And so I wanted to really talk about that part of this journey. And the message of the arrows is this idea that in life, we're going to get a lot of things shot at us that are, there's an enemy out there who's an enemy of our soul, of our lives, of who we are. And he's shooting arrows. And most of the time it comes as a message. It's not as much about the physical arrow. And so if you are listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you're on a cancer journey or you have some collision with cancer affecting your life. And inside of that, there's a story that's being written. And Satan wants to use that story and give you the message of the arrows. And so what I wanted to kick over to our host today, and then I'm just hoping maybe Pastor Eric, you can add to this conversation from your perspective, coming from a completely different culture and but from a Christian worldview. Talk to us about your starting point, message of the arrows, and then can you connect us into where you saw in your own cancer journey Satan using the message of the arrows with that cancer journey, how it affected your story? Because one of the big parts of what John really focuses on in most of his materials is that we're sitting inside of a larger story. And that was kind of part of part one. And a really interesting thing, I'll just add a little bit more before I kick it over to you, so it'll give you time to think. And that is, I liked this idea, and it's this concept of, it's as if we're being dropped into the middle of a story. And so when we're born, there's a story going on, and he likened it to showing up to a movie late. Mm-hmm. And so if you've ever started a movie late and you sit down or you're maybe even at home, you sit in, you're partway into it and you're trying to figure out what the characters are doing and what it's about. And is there a plot line? Well, life is a lot like that. It's like, here we are, we're born into an ongoing story. And then we go around and we start asking people, what's the real story here? What's the plot line? What does this all mean? And in doing that, we get a message about life, what its meaning is, what's important, who we are we valued, are we loved? And in the same time, there is a force that is here among us that wants to send us and give us a plot line that tells us a storyline that is a storyline that points us towards destruction. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to kick it back over to you now, just to think about your message of arrows, what's happened in your life, and then up into the cancer journey.
I know we're not on this chapter yet in the Sacred Romance, but...
Well, you can't skip ahead.
Hold on, just for this one point.
All right.
He wrote a chapter on the beloved. Yeah. And that's a wonderful, lovely concept about how God views us. And for instance, in the scriptures when he said, "This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased," but it's this concept of affirmation, validation, acceptance, and just love on this person. And I think that, to me, the message of the arrows, the arrow that comes in is designed, at least the messages from that arrow, is designed to undermine that and to take my identity and turn it on its head. And I'm just going to use this as, I've been open about this before, but I had an emotional, unavailable parent, very much so, absent from activities, from my life pretty much, except, just minimal. And so the message that I received from that arrow is that I don't have value, that I'm not wanted, that I don't have enough value to have a relationship with me. There's not enough there. And so I think I was gonna jump right into the cancer journey. Is that okay, Mister? What do you do
I
there
don't know,
again?
but
Facilitator?
I'm here to listen.
Yeah. And we touched on this last week, and it was the diagnosis of cancer comes especially as a Christ follower, and the question is, have I done something wrong?
Yeah, we did touch on that.
Yeah. And I think that is something that's a major theme, I think, at least for me, that I struggled with. Like, my life is going one way, 6 kids, practicing attorney. Everything seems to be going well. Bang, rough cancer diagnosis. What have I done?
Can I throw in here for
Please.
a second and just and if you ask that question, have I done something wrong? Isn't the answer always yes? Well, I mean, like, who among us hasn't done something wrong that we could identify as like, must be? That must be the reason, right? Because
Yeah, and I think
he who without sin throw the first stone. That kind of is like,
and a lot of times when I'm in the cancer context, people who've been diagnosed with cancer, have a rough cancer diagnosis, want to know causation. What caused this?
yeah,
And in the Christ follower community, there's a temptation also to point at sin in that person's life that brought that on. And you can make a case scripturally for some of that, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, for instance, we love to talk about Job, in which Job was a righteous man, and God allowed something to happen in his life, which, if you could say, what did he do wrong?
he did too much right.
Yeah, he did a lot right.
Consider my servant Job.
So you have this arrow, which I would consider to be the illness.
Yes.
Right? And then, so it's like, what's the message from this illness?
Yeah.
And when I wrote my book and when I thought this through, I named a number of things. I said, whether it's just being in a broken world and sickness happens, or the enemy brought this in, of course, with the authorization of God that it passed by his hands first, or it was something that I was doing wrong and God wanted to correct me, right? I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And I thought, for my particular journey, I didn't find it helpful to answer that question.
Because you still don't know.
Yes, except to say that God allowed something to happen in my life for a particular purpose.
So,
reason.
Is it fair to say that wrong question? Or is it good to ask the question, or is that a wrong question? We got a pastor here. We could ask him.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure. I definitely think it's a question that will come just because we're human, and just because we're trying to find a reason. I think Job and his friends, that's really what they were wrestling with. What could have caused this? Why would you go through so much sorrow? And they struggled, and they landed on sin, and we land on different things. But I think it's just a human aspect to ask, why? Why is this happening to me? So I think it's what we do with the question rather than it coming. It will definitely come, but what do we do with the question? My mom got diagnosed with cancer maybe about 6 months ago. And she's gone through an operation to cut off the cancer on one of her kidneys. And she's a very strong believer. And I could see her really wrestling with the emotions of it all. She'd be hopeful one day, she would be completely defeated the next day. She would be planning the future. She'd be hopeless about the future. And I just think it's just that human aspect of people, whether we're Christians or not. But I think then for us, it's really what do we do with the emotions and the arrows that will come in seasons of difficulty. Yeah.
Yeah,
good.
thanks, Pastor. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. And I'm sorry about your mom's diagnosis, but
Yeah.
it sounds like she's really processing quite a bit.
Yeah. She's it's been better for her because I think they caught it early, and she went through an operation, and they cut off part of her kidney. They didn't have to get rid of all of it as they had feared at the beginning, and she's going for a scan in the next few months, and so we're trusting God for that. But definitely, it's been a journey that as a family we've. Everybody wrestles quietly in their own way. And I think cancer is just one of those things where the patient is going through their own journey, but everyone around them is going through their own journey.
Yeah.
And they too are facing their own arrows. Did we not pray enough? I think the arrows just go all over the place. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
So true.
So let's go back to your journey here a bit, and I want to just explore what were the messages that you took on in your own journey then as you come up through?
My filter was the evangelical mindset that I had grown up in, and there definitely the tough emotions popped up: fear, anger, and sadness. Those were huge emotions to process. But also, I had this 2 + 2 = 4 concept of, okay, if I put in the hard work and I perform, then I'm going to get X. And cancer didn't make sense with that equation. And so I went into the mode of, did I fail somewhere? Is there a failure going on here? Now, as I process it, I understand that through this limit of cancer, God gave me a platform and anointed me for that platform. But back, I didn't understand it when I got diagnosed. I've been on the journey, Pastor Eric, for 20 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you think about something that, I used Eldridge's concept about being dropped into the middle of a movie going on, does that resonate with your own life experience and even the cancer journey? It's as if you're dropped into something that's unexplained, because what you just described was, then I didn't know, now I can see a little more clearly what's going on.
Yeah.
I think maybe helping, like if we're thinking about people who are going through a cancer journey, how do you work through the process of that? Because I think you're now you have arrows that have been shot at you, that you can easily take the negativity from that. That's the false stories from that. So we're going to be talking about how do you work towards the real? Like how do you have all of this information put to you? How do you move from the message of the arrows, and what do you do with them?
Well, let's say that John Eldridge's Sacred Romance book is correct, and I love the book, but that God has this grand story, and it's a love story, and there's skirmishes and battles and wars going on within the love story, but that this concept that God's blessing me, I'm beloved, I've given my life to him, and then bang, the arrow comes in, like this. And it actually tries to destroy, the message of the arrow tries to destroy the fact that I am his beloved. It's kind of like this.
I don't think we know that up front. That's the interesting piece to me. Or my experience. And tell me if you have it different. It's like, how many people start out in beloved
Right.
Like, so when I think about, for me, there's this concept of, hey, what's your word for the year? What's the thing that God is really communicating for the year? And for 2025, I really wanted to embrace this idea of being beloved, like to embrace God seeing me as a beloved son. And so, and the passage that I've grasped hold of now is this, as Jesus is baptized, the very first thing that God wanted him to hear was like, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. It's like before he went into ministry, he wanted to know up front. But, he has a whole formative years experience before he ever gets to his baptism. And I think we're in this place of we have all of our formative years experiences. And it wasn't one that told me I was beloved. In fact, it was the message of the arrows was louder than that for me. So I'm kind of curious about you guys' experiences in this a little bit. What was you get where I'm coming from a little bit? Yeah, we have competing stories, but it feels like, maybe, and this is why I think it's worth exploring a little bit, is that maybe I'm applying my experience over the top of everybody else. And maybe if you had secure attachment with your parents and they were, really, really good family structure, maybe you could walk into the experience with that being the loudest. I really am beloved. I knew that I was deeply loved by my parents, and that and I connected their love with God's love, and I saw that it was bigger than just human love. It was something greater, deeper, that could deal with the issues of time and death. But I kind of feel like that number of people is so. Who are they? In my experience, I'm curious.
I think I love the cinema. It's one of the things I like to do as a pastor, to sort of unwind, sort of just go late in the evening when I can just watch a movie. And I think a lot of if you find a movie going on in the middle, really depends on who you sit next to. You find the guy who doesn't want to talk to anyone, and you're like, oh,
that's good.
Could you fill me in? And he's like, no, I'd rather just leave me alone. And then there's a person who was sort of dozing off, and they are also lost about what's going on. And I feel like us getting into the movie, getting into the cinema, it depends on who's around you and what they feel you in on the story. And so I really agree with you that some of us are in this movie right in the middle, and the people we found ourselves around, they've given us a totally different picture of what's going on.
Brilliant.
And when the arrow comes in, I mean, it finds us thinking something completely different. Some of us are blessed enough to meet ministers and experiences that tell us, that we are God's beloved. And when the arrow comes, it challenges that. But yes, it could find us that we are thinking we are God's enemies, and the arrow comes to affirm you are God's enemy. And so I think it really depends on where you're dropped at in the middle of that movie. Yeah.
Who you're dropped next to. Yes, that's so good. That's a brilliant analogy. I like that. So let's go back to your story. And let's apply the concept there a little bit. And how does that flesh out for your story? That you were dropped into the middle of this journey. You've had arrows shot at you. You had the question in your mind, did I do something wrong? Who did God set you next to, and how did that play out? I mean, who did you get set next to? Maybe, what's going on?
Yeah, definitely family. Who was, I like what Pastor Eric said. They were in their own place of processing the arrow. My 6 kids and wife, and is dad going to live? What's going on there? Then my greater, a little bit extended family from there. And my mom had terminal cancer when I was diagnosed with my cancer, so she didn't have much longer to live. So for us, we were dealing with the prospect that cancer equals death. And strong believers in a church, but and somewhat acquainted with walls, but definitely not acquainted with how to process those walls in a super healthy way. Now, the beloved concept, I like what you said. I mean, we have in our recovery ministry, we have a brochure, and it's the children of dysfunctional families, and everyone picks it up. So, yeah, I mean, definitely we grow up in in a broken place. And, I know as a parent, I made a lot of mistakes and my brokenness came out. So the concept of communicating belovedness to my kids, I hope that they got that message somewhat. I think the message that I received was, if you perform well, then you are beloved. So it was kind of like that.
That's not a message of
equation.
belovedness at all.
No.
I mean,
So
that's the message of transactional
yeah,
Christianity, transactional worldview, and that's a really interesting thing. That
yeah. So I think that was more in line with
I'm thinking about when you were
my
diagnosed a
formative
bit,
years.
like you're in that stage where you have the diagnosis,
Yeah.
and you hear the message of, did I do something wrong? And you said you finally processed to, well, maybe similar to Job in one sense, is that without God stepping in and communicate with him, is like it was an unanswerable question, because while we see in the passage Job was righteous, we also know he wasn't sinless. So there was no way that he could sit there and say, I was sinless. At the same time, it doesn't appear that he deserved what was coming his way. And so there was at least an ability for him to be able to see, hey, I'm not deserving of having this level of calamity put upon me. And so it's not based upon I've sinned so much that I deserve to have everything just calamity, my children killed, everything, destroyed. But he couldn't actually answer the question either.
Yeah.
Because that's what he got to with God, right? It was like, he was stuck on the why, and God really didn't ever answer his question. God was just like, were you there? Can you just see where you're sitting at in the story? Were you there when I created the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I created the storehouse of snow for all of time? And Job couldn't answer his question. And God was like, then you're going to have to just recognize where you sit in the story more so than have an answer. Which is a fascinating thing. And that's what I think I heard you say earlier.
Yeah, the crisis of faith for me, the deep wall, was 10 years later after my diagnosis. So getting the diagnosis that I did, it was it required a very major surgery, removing a lot of stuff and replacing stuff. The bladder, prostate, all that was taken out, and intestinal tissue was used to create a new reservoir in my body. But I've had over 50 surgical procedures in the journey, and 6 recurrences, and 7 years of systemic treatment. There's been a lot of things that have gone on, and 2 times telling me to go home and call hospice. After 10 years at my 14th surgery, that was when I couldn't scale the wall in my own efforts, or, like my MO up to that point was, I'm going to white knuckle it, because it was my 14th surgery. Each surgery took away the cancer. And I was like, okay, we're good. We're going to be fine. Everything's going to be good. God's got this. And then in my 14th surgery, it was, no one has anything.
Can I actually rephrase that even?
Yeah.
Because we've had a lot of conversation, and you've read your journal here, so I want to put the arrow, I think, that was shot at you by Satan in this, or that was given to you, and that was, you've been misled by God. Because what I remember your early years was, I'm going to do surgery on your cancer, but I'm also going to do the surgery on your heart, and your journey is going to have great meaning. That was the message you got from God. And so you believed that message when you heard that early on in your cancer journey, one of your first big surgeries that you had.
Right.
And so you lived and walked in that, and now you're further in, and things got worse. And they got to what looked like no hope. And the arrow that in that moment of no hope, the arrow that was shot at you was, you can't trust God. See, it's not really real.
Yeah, what it was, Pastor Eric, was sitting in a Manhattan hospital in ICU, and metastatic cancer. That's what they had found, and they were removing tumors. There were three surgeons working, and the basic gist was I had a 5% survival rate with this cancer, and I plunged into a depression there, and we've talked a lot about it. I have a whole journal where I really expressed what was going on inside of me, my inner world. But definitely, that was the message was, you told me I was going to have a ministry. You told me I would have something meaningful from this. And here I am. I may not even leave the hospital. Yeah. So that's exactly right. I felt misled.
You felt misled.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because this is a universal experience, I think, of every person who's gone on this road. Is like we are going to get a message from arrows in our lives, and having to figure out what's real out of those messages is this description now of being dropped into the middle of the story. And I love the way you described it. It's like, but who did you get set next to? Because Pastor Eric and I had this great conversation yesterday at some point, and but in the middle of it was like, you cannot do this journey alone. So, and one of the reasons why is because we've been dropped into the middle of a story. And if there was nobody there to tell you what the plot is, right, what's going on, you more than likely would be so overcome with the arrows that are coming your way that you will almost always lead to something that's destruction. And so, and even when you have been set next to people who have a pretty good understanding of the plot line, you still teeter so many times. Like you had a solid family, you had a Christian worldview and a connection with God in your upbringing, and yet you still were at this point with the amount of pain, suffering, and then this arrow being shot at you to where you were going, I've been misled. Or I feel misled. And in that moment, it's like what happens is such an important part of your journey. But it's the arrows that really bring you to these places. And I have a sense that this is a universal thing. This isn't just a Peter Scalzo in an isolated cancer journey. This is every cancer journey. This is every journey through life. We have to hit these walls. And so it's a really important concept to wrestle with a little bit. And there wasn't something wrong about that. It is what happens. It's a reality that you had to walk through. Like you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, you said it's a universal thing, but I think it's more like a Christian thing. You know, I think Christians who are sort of have a balanced teaching, they understand that they will go through challenges. They kind of are taught that being Christian or following a Christian way of life will not sort of keep you from going through challenges. But we've always been taught that there will be meaning in our suffering. You know, that's a Christian thing, that we're taught that God will bring meaning out of our challenges. And when we, especially something like cancer that can linger for so long until it begins to seem meaningless, then we really struggle. I think as a Christian, sometimes, you can receive a report and be like, okay, I believe God will bring something out of this. He's always working through everything. But when it seems, then when the arrow comes and says, but what came out of this? What meaning came out of all of this? Right. That's a devastating place for a Christian, because one of the stories we've been told, if you sat next to other Christians in the story, is that we go through suffering, but there's always meaning to it. Yes. And when this seems to be no meaning, as you say, it hit you 10 years later and you are like, was there meaning in it all? Was there any point of it? I think that's also a very devastating arrow to receive as a Christian, to wonder, did it really have meaning at the end of the day?
Yeah, how does that relate to you? I like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, really
so I think I could understand why you would say that too. Is like we in Christian circles, really we it might be idealizing a little bit too, but this idea, hey, some people recognize, hey, there's no meaning in the world. It's just this is the way it works, and it's all a transaction. And we got here by accident, and our death is going to be just another accident, or just the way the waves of nature work. It's just part of the great cycle. How did you wrestle with? That's good. How did you wrestle with that in that sense? I think that's right. It's like that whole question about meaning really gets.
It's a great point. And I mean, Ecclesiastes is a book that I love. I mean, it's all about there's no meaning in life, It's finally the author at the end finds meaning in God, right? Fear God. But I think definitely at that 14th surgery after 10 years, I thought, there's no meaning in this. This is meaningless. And I think that era, the message of that one is that just gets at the whole foundation of your life, of your walk. And I think building meaning back into the journey was huge. And God did that. My testimony, Pastor Eric, is that God rescued me in that place through his word and through his presence and brought meaning back into that journey. So
we have 5 or 6 more minutes before we kind of like to hit a timeline here, but I would like to just pick your brain, Pastor Eric, just for a second, since you're coming from Africa. You have you're a pastor in a different culture than what we're normally a part of here. And what would you say are the big arrow messages that your culture struggles with? And I'm curious whether or not they are similar messages, or what it might look like for somebody who's you've got to experience both U.S. and African culture, but be really fascinated to hear some perspective there.
Yeah, I think in Africa we're still a very animist kind of culture where we believe spirits cause things that happen, and so there will be a sense of maybe even more greater, because America to some point is still a very scientific worldview. It's cancer, it's cells growing out of control, but for us, it's definitely something has been displeased. There may be someone that you need to appease, and so to a greater level for us, people will try and look for reason. Who did I wrong? Which spirits do I need to make right? Make peace with, so that this can go away. And we always come down to those kinds of things. So, and I think with that, it breeds suspicion, because there's still a sense of maybe somebody wished me wrong. There's obviously witchcraft. That arrow then just leads to devastation, not only of the person, but of their relationships. And so I think for me in the African culture, because not everyone is as educated to think about, cancer happens, this is the reason for cancer and all of that, there is a lot of superstition. And that arrow, because of that worldview, has even much more devastation, I think, in our context. Maybe I could definitely be wrong, but I think it has a lot of devastation because of our worldview and the way we see things in Africa.
Wow. And how do you, as a pastor, approach that? How do you see this happening now? How do you approach that now in your context?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. You want to sit with people. I go and visit people who've lost loved ones. Just before I left, there's a particular lady I went to visit with, and she had lost her dad not too long ago, and we stood with her as best as we could, prayed with her, and then in a short while thereafter, she lost her mother-in-law, and she could not stop saying, there's something here. And so she moved out of her house, took her family to a very far-off environment. And I went to visit with her before I came to the States, and she was adamant that she believed that house was cursed and bad things. Now, sadly, as soon as she moved, she lost somebody else. And she was devastated. Her idea was that the place where she was had caused all her troubles, and now she's moved somewhere else and she's lost someone. Wow. And so she's like, I have no solution. And so trying to help people to just come back to the point of, again, this in this story that we are watching, bad things happen. And that's part of this world, that it's a fallen world, and it's not really because of anything you and I have done. It's still something that people really wrestle with, because again, that idea of why is such a struggle for all of us. It's a struggle for Job and his friends. It's a struggle for us, and in our culture, it's a tough one.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Pastor Eric. Appreciate that.
We're running up against time. I think our listeners are going to have this idea what the message of the arrows looks like, and I appreciate you sharing.
Where's our guest from next week coming?
Yeah, well,
we have one from Africa, right? Kenya.
The arrow is going to be that his flight is canceled and he has to stay here for a
And
week.
he gets to do this again next week.
But I do appreciate you sharing such great wisdom and
Yeah,
understanding.
thanks, Pastor Eric. Yeah.
I think what I'd like to do is leave our listeners with. I don't want to leave them in a hopeless haze. The message of the arrows is like that story of belovedness. If you're listening to this podcast, the message that God wants you to know and understand is you are beloved, even no matter whatever is happening in your life. And we're going to talk a lot about the different layers of this as we go over the next coming weeks. But just understanding that, hey, I don't want to leave you. And I know Peter doesn't want to leave. It's like, hey, it's just everybody has to deal with the message of the arrows. Get over it. It's no, there's a story that's also out there and it may not always feel like what's going on, but the reason Job was going through suffering is because God said, hey, would you consider my servant Job? He saw Job in a completely different light, and he didn't see Job as an outsider, as cursed, but he saw him as his. And he was beloved, and he cared about him enough to even come and converse with him in the end, which is pretty cool when you think about it. It's like in that storyline. And I think God wants to say to everyone all of our listeners, you're beloved. You're in the middle of a cancer journey. You're struggling with a family member who's has a cancer journey. You're beloved, and God wants to meet you in this, but it may not look at all what you think it's going to look like, and it may not feel like you're beloved, but you are. And anything else you want to add to that?
No, that's wonderful.
That's it. Anything else you want to add, Pastor, before we close out?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that needs to be the thing that whomever you sit next to reminds you often. Yeah. It wouldn't make sense maybe in our time of watching this film, but eventually the conclusion is you are beloved. And, no matter how long the movie is, that's the conclusion. And I think that's an important reminder.
Yeah. We may get dropped into the middle of a show. We will likely get yanked out before the end of the show. But the end of this particular story is a grand story, and you will get to see and know what it feels like to be beloved. So we'll leave you with that today. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Pastor,
Thanks,
for being
Pastor.
here.
Yeah,
And
appreciate it.
be blessed.
Yeah, blessings.